On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by 5280 Life Sciences Consulting. If you need help setting your strategy, meeting your operational goals, or you are selecting and implementing critical technology in your business, we should talk. Visit 5280lifescience.com to schedule a meeting and find out more.
Today on the podcast, I'd like to welcome Chris Conley. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm more than happy to. I started as a recruiter and have been a recruiter really for the last 22 years in the life sciences industry. Before that, for a couple of years in IT. It's interesting. I had that convergence point of biology and technology. I have a real strong background in that. And really the last, 12 years, I've been working with startup companies and not necessarily in recruiting. I've been doing a lot of different things, wearing a lot of hats because I've really morphed over into being like an advisor and startup consultant for the life science industry. In
terms of startups, whenever you say startup, I guess the one thought I have is that there seems to be a lot of definitions of startups. So just what more specifically do you mean in terms of people that you work with whenever you say startups?
Great question. Okay. Usually companies that are either in like an incubator accelerator where they're just spinning out, and then when they're ready to launch on their own, this is usually they're like seed funded companies at that point, but they're not generating any revenue at that either. And these are companies that are not really being funded by venture capitalists. They're really long before that. They eventually will need to raise their Series A. And these are the companies that really don't, because if you're working with a venture capitalist, for instance, you have access to their network. And when you leave the incubator or accelerator programs and you're out on your own for the first time, you don't really have access to a network either. So I found that seems to be a sweet spot for me, and where I've just done a lot of work in that space because I've been able to leverage my connections and network and my experience, and also wear multiple hats and being very flexible, being able to change at a moment's notice, which startup companies require.
So can you give me some examples of, you've mentioned wearing a lot of hats a couple of times. So what do you mean by that? So what sort of things do they have you doing, for them?
Good question. So I think a good place to start is to explain really the advantages and the experiences of a recruiter and really what you gain from that, and how that really it morphs over into life and also in working with startups. Because I'm not a scientist, I'm not trained as a scientist, but oftentimes when you're speaking to a scientist, you really need to know and understand exactly what they're doing, what they're working on, and how to speak to them. And it's challenging. When I first started recruiting, absolutely nothing about the biotech industry. And so I'm entirely self-taught, bootstrapped. And so I think people who are self-taught often have a deeper knowledge or more practical knowledge and experience of the industry, because you have to really learn it yourself so you can actually speak to that, and also know the companies and know the landscape and all of it. And then you add in the investors and the venture community and all the different aspects of a startup company. Recruiting by wearing multiple hats too, because you change constantly, daily. Recruiting is all about the human relationships and dealing with people and understanding how to motivate and how to reach out and how to get them to respond, and just working with individuals. So I'd say probably I think recruiting has also really become a very integral part of building a business and a successful business. Anything and everything that you read out there, CEOs are always looking for hiring, and that is what keeps them up at night most of the time, is human capital, especially with a startup. Because again, you don't have a network, you don't really necessarily know who or how to reach out to. You can reach out to the people that you know, but there again, you're limited. And when you do reach out to somebody, they will always start with, well, I don't know if there's looking, or I don't know anybody who's looking. You're not necessarily looking to hire the people who are looking. You want the best, who fit your company. So referral networks are challenging, even on a good day. By being a recruiter, we wear so many hats too, which really does align with startups. It's about relationship building. It's about strategic thinking. It's about research and understanding your client, and also where people are working. And for instance, within academia, that's not the best place to pull a scientist from, because again, well, they're really passionate. Scientists are passionate about what they do. And they are so into their work. And I love that. I absolutely love scientists. And probably in another life, I will be a scientist. But in this one, I'm there to help support them. And even, for instance, like with a scientist, you really don't want them leading a company, a startup company. Most are introverted or shy. Not all. That's a blanket statement. I don't mean that in a negative way either. It's just that most are, if you're on the bench, you're not necessarily interfacing with the external public on a daily basis. And again, you get so stuck in your specific research, it's sometimes very difficult to understand what they're doing and how to talk with them. So again, these are just, things I've learned over the years, and it's not everybody. There are always the exceptions out there, and there are many. There are just too many to try to even think of at this point.
It's interesting that you say that scientists are introverted, because I oftentimes will say that one of the greatest things in terms of science, and you see it on TV as well, and the scientists that are often interviewed on the news channels and things like that, they'll come on and in terms of their story and the thread that they want to weave overall, that picture isn't quite there. And I've heard something like greater than 90% of the population in the world would tell you that they were introverted, which I find funny, because if somebody were to ask me if I'm introverted, I would say yes, but I have my moments where I could do certain things, but I also, coming outside of my bubble is just as uncomfortable for me as it is probably for anybody else. I'm not so introverted that I feel like I have to all the time stay sheltered. And I think helping people tell that story of what is it that your science is going to do, and what's it going to deliver, and how does that impact the world? That's where I think that my belief is, anyway, that people like you can help bridge and translate and things like that as well. To your point about it not necessarily being a negative, it could be the person is probably brilliant at what they do, but they need other people to help them with their parts of the story too.
Absolutely. And that's just like building a company. You're usually building a really successful company. When you're building one, is you always hire to your CEO's weaknesses. You don't want the exact skills. You need a matrix of skills when you're hiring, because say, for instance, if your CEO doesn't really like to present, doesn't have strong presentation skills, you want to be able to have an external facing CSO who understands the science, who can translate that into something that in lay terms that it excels at it and that can help sell the company. It's a partnership. So I've seen a lot of that over the years. And so it's not always that everybody has, that external facing quality of being able to communicate and is charismatic, or oftentimes you'll see scientists presenting something that they are truly passionate about, but it's not engaging. It's just not something that, unless you have an audience of scientists, and there again, knowing your audience as well. I mean, I think this has really been highlighted this last year with COVID and everything being digital now, and listening to so many scientists and even founders presenting and really only talking about the science. You need to be able to tell a story. You need to be able to capture your audience's attention. And why should they invest in you? Why should they listen to your presentation? Sitting for hours and hours, listening to these over and over again, drawing on, it's something needs to stand out. And the ones that do are the ones that typically investors are going to be calling back and investing in, because they understand it. They don't need to bring in all their analysts and scientists and such to listen to interpret what was just presented. So I think it's a rare quality. An ideal, who I think is brilliant, who's so good at taking and translating very complex science and understanding it well enough to be able to talk about it, but translating it into something that is relatable. And that's Francis Collins. I made the recommendation a while ago that Francis Collins would be a much better spokesperson than Tony Fauci. I adore Tony. I think he's amazing, but he was really berated and under the former regime. A lot of people have not been listening to him, which is so sad. But by putting somebody like Francis Collins in, who is in a lateral position almost, but is so good at presenting. He rides a motorcycle, he is in a band, and he's just very charismatic and fun to listen to. And there again, you get the buy-in too, as well, because people can relate to him.
Yeah, you got to be able to tell that story in a relatable way for sure. And having whatever your method of gaining experiences that make you relatable is something that does help. So going to take a little bit of a different turn. So I've certainly hired quite a few recruiters in my past to help fill critical positions and things like that. And I've seen different approaches taken with people that are trying to put butts in seats for a company. What is your approach? Can you explain a little bit about how your approach is different?
First of all, you need to understand what your client needs. What do they need? So that's critical to really get a clear picture and understanding. But it's more than that. It's more than just looking on LinkedIn and finding a person. You really need to understand the dynamics, like the culture of the company. And again, those skills, those gap skills that need to be filled, and the reason why they're hiring, and what the importance of the position is. And then understanding, again, where to look. They're not all on LinkedIn. I'd say the majority of the scientists in this world are not. And so how do you find them? Well, and it takes a ton of time and research to figure out where they're at, and also within the area, what they specialize in. Because a scientist is not just a scientist. So you either have your biologist, your chemist, and what they'll be doing and what you need them to do, and then where to find them. So I would say there is a method. I mean, for instance, when I take on a position with a client that I'm working on, we'll sit down and talk. And I'll talk to the team too, if necessary, whoever is going to be involved in the hiring process, and why the position is open and what they need in order to fill it. What skills do they need that they lack to bring that person on that is going to fulfill. And then what you do is you look at their competitors, you look at where the scientists are, you look at the individuals and who are working in a specific area. Say ADC linkers was one that I just finished helping a startup with one of their chief scientific officer positions. And they needed this very specific skill. It's called an ADC linker. And so somebody with a chemistry background is great for that position, because that's where the work's been done. And there's not been any other work that I'm aware of, at least in another therapeutic area outside of cancer. I think there are 8 therapeutics that have been approved, and all of those are in cancer. Working in neurology was new. So they lack the experience in neurology, but this ADC piece, which is absolutely critical, because you're linking basically one target to another.
Chris, I have a scenario that I'd like to talk about. So if I were an AI company in life sciences, and I've interviewed a few leaders here on the podcast, I'd just like to find out, so with somebody like yourself, how would you go about helping me find the right talent, and why would you be the right person to try and help with that sort of search?
Good question. I've actually done quite a bit of work in this space. I mentioned earlier on that I started in IT, and this was pre-2000. I think we started in like 1998, and I was working in IT. And this is where everybody was very concerned about, okay, 2000 comes and then everything's going to fall apart. Everything's going to fall offline. And so they were scrambling to put things together. I was working in it at that time and was doing a lot of work with a lot of the ERPs and their management systems and working in IT. So I cut my teeth in that area. And then really the majority of my career since 2000 has been working in the life sciences. And so it's really become an area of focus now with that convergence point with biology and IT technology, and understanding how it's so important to understand the biology and how AI and machine learning and finding the patterns in the data, how critical it is on so many different levels, like either in drug discovery and development or most recently with COVID, understanding we needed to wait until we had enough data to understand what the trend or pattern is that they were seeing, and showing that it was safe, or knowing how to target a drug. There are just so many different things you can do with it. So long story short, I've done a lot of work in this space because I understand both sides, the IT side and the biology side. So I'm rather unique in that area. Not everybody, usually, recruiters will specialize in a specific area. If you are an IT recruiter or AI machine learning recruiter, you stay in that lane. You don't necessarily understand what you're doing in the life sciences side, whereas I've worked in both and I understand just that key point and how they interact together, how they work together. I've done quite a bit of work in working with several companies on their chief scientific officer or chief technology officer positions. And so what you do, it's interesting, is when you start to map out who your candidates are, your potential targets that you're going to be reaching out to, I've created an amazing database over the years, and it's a network as well. And what that really has led to is knowing who to reach out to. So a lot of that work has already been done that I've done. So I know the top people in the industry, and I also know how to reach out to them. That's the other piece that's really challenging, and also how to draw them in, how to get their interest level.
Yeah, it for sure is an important thing to have. So many of the companies, by the time that I start working with a lot of companies, it seems like they have a lot of consultants that they're working with. And this idea of hiring somebody to fill that spot where they may have had talent in the past, for some of them, it's very risky because they're trying to make sure that they get the right experience level, that they have the right level of execution, and they maintain that, which, is what kind of made me chuckle a little bit whenever you mentioned a little while ago, you talked about possibly hiring scientists directly from school. I've had one client that said, look, I have to stop hiring so many people from school because they don't understand the business world. They don't understand that yet, is a comment that this client made. And I can understand, because it's, if your world is one where you're normally supported by other means of funding that aren't necessarily time bound, your sort of world is a bit different than this startup world where, look, I need something to provide to the next level or the next, sort of phase of my development within this certain time frame. And I think it's so critical. And it seems, to your point, AI or any form of IT support, whether it be bioinformatics or somehow synthesizing information, so much of the information that we're getting, and finding that talent is key.
It's tough. People think it's super easy just to go on LinkedIn, and that's where you're going to find your talent pool or your pipeline. But that's not necessarily the case. And oftentimes, too, in a startup scenario, for instance, you can't afford these individuals. They're just way too expensive. So then what do? Do you hire somebody that is just out of school, but they're not going to have that experience that you need for that role? And that's a critical position. And so what do? How do you find them? That's where you have to get creative oftentimes and think outside of the box. You can't do that on LinkedIn. It is a tool, it's software. It's something that is a great tool to have, but there are so many different areas critical areas that you need. Going back to what we had discussed before, how the skills and experiences you pick up as being a recruiter and how that prepares you for so many other roles in life, whatever direction you choose to go. There's the aspect of negotiation. It's marketing, it's advertising, it's public relations, especially, say, for instance, if your company has a challenging or bad reputation, you've got some negative press. Recruiters are amazing because we're the ambassadors for the company. We're an extension in changing that perception. It's often so overlooked, but it's the outreach and the interaction and the communication, and then following that process all the way through. And then even to the point where you're helping to onboard. People are people. We'll change our minds, in midstream. And or maybe the offer was too low and the CEO didn't listen to you when presenting that offer. And then you have to start the search all over again. There have been so many studies and research about how costly it is if you hire the wrong person. And it really can be devastating to a company, and also incredibly expensive. And even leaving that position open for a very long time can be devastating because it's putting a crazy strain on the rest of your team when you really need just that one person that you can offload that to and let them be the expert. Turn them loose, turn it over to them. So it's a very challenging role. And like I said, you wear multiple hats constantly, and you're always networking every single day. For the last 22 plus years, I have been networking and reaching out and talking to people. So you really get a feel for people, and then you can network with them, or you can, it's really more of an art. It's not really a science.
When I think about you, and we've known each other for a little bit, and the way I think about you overall is somebody that is constantly connecting people. You're constantly being that link between somebody, one person and another that needs to meet. And I just, it definitely, you could see that come through in just your normal everyday interactions, that you're constantly networking and you're constantly interacting with people to try and not just build your network for you, you're helping other people link and get connected as well.
It's really something that I'm passionate about, because this is not all about being compensated on it. In fact, that really is something that's off-putting to me. It's really about when I see that I can make an introduction that would benefit two people, and it's really for the greater good, because you really don't know what direction it's going to go. But to be able to open that door and to make that introduction and then just get out of the way and see magic happen, it's fulfilling. It's so rewarding. It's just amazing. It really makes me happy. That's something that it's a driver. I love that connection and making that happen. I've seen incredible things happen just by one introduction. And when you read all these different books and articles and such all over the place, it's always about the power of a connection or the power of a network. Okay, it is really true, because it comes naturally to me. I don't know where it comes from, but I guess I can see the value. I do. It comes from recruiting. It's because you get to know a person, and oftentimes over the phone, not even in person, and you get to know them so well by talking to them over the years that you know about their family, about their passion and what they're working on, what they're interested in. You get to know them as an individual. And then you'll meet somebody else and it's, you remind me of somebody, or they start to talk about something that is somebody else is passionate about that I know. It's, oh my gosh, you two need to meet. And it's that introduction that's so fun. I love it. And hopefully someday it'll really lead to, wouldn't it be great if it led to curing a specific type of cancer?
Yeah, given the size and scope of your network, I wouldn't doubt that could be true. So one of the things that when I look at what I do now overall with my consulting business, one of the biggest things that I know that I get to do early on is get to interview clients. I get to interview clients, and just as much as they're interviewing me, I'm trying to figure out, are they the right fit for me or not? And will this be something that I think is going to work? So what are some of the biggest attractions that you have to clients that you work with?
Oh, I have to really believe in what they're doing. I really do. I have to really, for instance, I'd be terrible at doing something in just primary health care. It's just, there's so much other work. And big pharma, I really have shied away from working with them too as well, because they don't really need what I'm doing. And when I work with startups, like I said, I do a lot more than just recruit. So they don't need that. They're already established. They have revenue. However, what they don't have necessarily is a connection or an introduction into a startup company. And I could see that when they both need one another making that introduction, they have to be passionate about what they're doing. And I have to believe in them. I have one client that I adore. I love their management team. They're the best. I absolutely adore them. It's not necessarily in an area that I've done a lot of work in before. They are actually focusing in behavioral health and suicide prevention. And they've established the 3 biomarkers through a blood test to see if you have PTSD or not. And right now there are surveys out there that it's just really an antiquated process. I like them. I genuinely like them as people. So what I look for when I'm looking for a client is it someone I can help, number one. And especially being able to utilize my network. And also, am I respected? As long as they will listen and find value in what I'm doing and how I can help them, and treat me with respect, I'll do whatever it takes to help them be successful. So that has to have that passion behind it too. I think if I don't believe in the product and what they're doing, or if their team isn't easy to work with, or if there's some major challenge, and you think there are major flaws with certain companies that you just walk away from, and those ones stand out really pretty fast. But in the startup community, if I can work with them and as a true partner and believe in what they're doing, it's amazing the doors that I can open for them.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing with the clients that you're helping today? What are they facing given where we're at with the economy and where the state of the world is today? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing your clients face?
Well, I did a lot of work in COVID this last year, as I think everybody else did. And I've seen a lot of my clients pivot. And I think some of them are still chasing like emergency use authorization. And I almost feel like some of them are missing the mark on it right now, that because we're starting to get a handle on the virus, we're long from over. But they need to have multiple shots on goal, for instance, yes, you could still be working on your emergency use authorization for your therapeutic, but you need to have something else in your pipeline, because when COVID does go away, you need to go back to your core competency. I think people are missing the mark there and not maintaining that balance at the same time. I would say that not having a product that investors want to invest in, or is really something that industry would be interested in or use. I would also say that I've seen the little companies are always trying to raise money, and they are so challenged with it. They don't necessarily, and I'm thinking like first time CEOs, they don't know who to go to in order to go raise, to help with their funding raise. And they say if they're focusing on venture capital firms and they're not thinking about maybe family offices and foundations, and they probably do to a certain degree, but they don't have the connections, or they don't know who is investing in what. They don't do the research. Okay, I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges when it comes to a startup company, and not knowing who to reach out to, and then also what they're interested in. Sometimes smaller founders get so focused on what they're doing that they don't look at who they reach out to and ask for funding. They can be completely off the mark. And that's, I think, really challenging by spending the time that it's going to take in order to do the research, to know exactly who you're going to be reaching out to, and then creating a value proposition and a story, making it real. People invest in people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things. The walk to go find additional funding is one of those things that I wonder overall, when most people approach it, how do they think about it? Because it seems to me like there's this sort of philosophy that, hey, if I could just find this one investor to carry me through this phase. But realistically, if you look at what most people have to do, it's a series of funding levels that you're trying to get to. And you have to start early on telling your story. And as it continues to evolve, people will become more and more interested, I think, because there's this you're moving from bench science to something that's scalable and manufacturable. And eventually, hopefully you get it to patients. But at the same time, it's the walk of using your network and everybody around you that has a network, using their power of their network to try and have additional conversations, even if they don't lead to anything today. This idea of trying to find funding just seems to be something that comes up commonly with me as well. That one of the big challenges that I hear from leaders is just finding that next level of funding. And I certainly have a network. I know you have a fantastic network of people as well. And it's how do you use your friends to help you tell the story seems to be an important way to try and overcome one of the greatest challenges I think most startups face.
Absolutely. I think it's so interesting because, in sitting in listening to all of these presentations, they're all about the science. I'll tell you, if some of these presenters, and usually they're your CEO, if they would talk about the science from a different level, meaning if you would focus on telling the story of the company as to why you started it and how it's going to benefit the patient, and don't dig into the deep science. If they really want that information, you have all the documents in the world that you can send to an investor, but you want to get their buy-in. Of course, you have to make it valid that, okay, we do believe in this and this is why we believe in it and why it's going to work. If they would just share a story like that, I bet that they would probably get a lot more potential investors talking to them than just yawning and droning on about how the science works and really digging into the weeds. They would stand out.
Yeah, for sure. So I have 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
People inspire me. They really do. Probably because I've worked in a people business forever. Oh my gosh, I just read about Jennifer Doudna. In fact, I just ordered her new book. I'm really excited to read that. I will never forget the time that I was at a family office event at Harvard, and I got to meet Craig Mello and George Church. Oh my gosh, that was like nirvana for me. I told you I'm a science geek. I really am. And that, I'm not kidding. I was just in awe. And they were like less than 5 feet from me. And here I remember sitting next to a guy from Morgan Stanley. He's a friend of mine, and he wasn't paying attention. I'm like, do you know who they are? Oh my gosh, I'm starstruck. I don't get starstruck with rock stars or movie stars like normal people do. But the scientists, oh my gosh. Yeah, I would say they truly inspire me because they're so dedicated to work. And most of the time, their work fails. So they have to get up in the morning and start all over again when things just fell apart. And yet they do. Or even all of the scientists that have been working on the vaccines this last year, putting in 24 hours a day, the unsung heroes who really are not seen. You'll never know them. They'll never be seen because they're the ones that are just doing the work, getting in, digging in, doing it. They have such amazing dedication and passion for what they're doing. That truly is inspiring to me.
Excellent. What concerns you?
Oh my goodness. Again, this vaccine and also the future pandemics that I don't think that we're taking into consideration. One major concern with the vaccine is getting enough shots in arms and making sure that people are actually being vaccinated. I think so many people have been buying into these conspiracy theories and thinking that it's going to change our DNA. And I've heard so many of them, it just makes me cringe. But they don't do the research. They don't really, maybe they look on Fox News and they think that what Fox News is saying is the end all be all and that's it. It's the gospel. And they don't do any of their own research on their own to come up with their own opinion. They're taking somebody else's. That drives me insane. That really does scare me. And I'd say, again, the future pandemics that we need to be prepared for so this doesn't happen again.
Yeah. And what excites you?
Oh, gosh, maybe someday being a part, like I said, of finding a cure for cancer, especially pancreatic. If there's anything that I could ever do, because I lost my dad in 2015 to pancreatic in less than a month from his diagnosis. I'll never forget it. I remember, and I made a promise to him that I helped him come to terms with, his knowing he was dying and acceptance of it. Thankfully, that was a gift that he gave me. But I promised him that if it takes me the rest of my life, I would be working on somehow helping to find a cure for pancreatic, so that families don't have to suffer and go through what we did. It was not easy. But that would be exciting, my gosh, to be able to have, make maybe that one magic connection. And that introduction that led to a cure, again, that to me would be nirvana.
I always feel like we're getting closer with personalized medicine and how they're designing therapies today and things like that. I personally feel like we're getting closer. I know that cancer is a tough disease, and I'm not kidding myself that the cure is not around the corner. But at the same time, I have to feel like we're getting so much closer to being able to impact things. And even you look at some types of cancer today, if you were to rewind the clock 20 years ago, those types of cancer instantly would end your life. And today there are treatments for them that at least extend your life, if not completely allow you an opportunity to move forward in your life. And so I really look forward to those days. And pancreatic cancer for sure is a very tough disease.
Yes. And I think within cancer in specific, it's more like an umbrella. You have all of these, it's many diseases within one. And so there is not going to be just a magic bullet that cures all cancer. That's impossible. You have your blood-based cancers, you have your viral cancers, you have your solid tumors. So there are just so many different areas. And maybe it's overcoming that and that understanding as to what it is. And maybe that would be something to focus on. I don't know. The same thing with the virus. There are many viruses out there. It's the exact same thing. It's more of a disease with many different branches to it. I agree with you.
I just think there are so many brilliant scientists today working on the right problem with the right technology behind them, and having the right people in the right place is so important. And so with that, Chris Conley, I wanted to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Thanks for being here and for spending time with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. It was really fun talking with you today.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.